The scalding liquid met the back of her hand, and she hissed, dropping the delicate china cup. It shattered against the marble floor, a sharp, violent sound in the crushing silence of the room. Brown coffee sprayed across the pristine white, splattering the hem of an antique Persian rug. This was the third thing she had broken today. She was a hurricane in a quiet house, a whirlwind of clumsy apologies and flustered movements. It was the perfect cover. Her heart did not race. Her hands did not tremble, save for the slight, practiced tremor she affected. She was chaos, but inside, she was cold, still, and patient. From his wheelchair by the vast, sunless window, Marco Moretti watched her. He had not moved. His head was turned just so, his profile carved from stone, his dark eyes fixed not on the mess, but on her. Most people saw the chair first, the paralysis that had stolen the use of his legs and left one arm with only limited function. They saw a broken king, a man caged in his own body. Lena saw the stillness. It was the most dangerous thing about him. It was a predatory stillness, the coiled waiting of a snake. He was the most powerful man in the city, even from that chair. And she was here to burn his kingdom to the ground. She began to babble, her voice high and breathy, a performance she had perfected. "Oh my goodness. I am so sorry, Mr. Moretti. I don't know what's wrong with me today. My hands are just butterfingers. Let me get that." She knelt, her movements deliberately awkward as she began picking up the larger shards of porcelain. Her bright floral nurse's uniform a jarring splash of color in the monochromatic austerity of his study. The room smelled of old books, expensive leather, and the faint, clean scent of sandalwood that clung to him. She had been hired a week ago, the latest in a string of private nurses who had failed to last more than a few days. They were intimidated by his silence, unnerved by the hulking guards posted at every door, or simply unequal to the task of caring for a man who radiated such cold authority. Lena, however, had presented herself as just competent enough to be useful, and just scattered enough to be harmless. A chaotic, slightly ditzy caregiver who was grateful for the exorbitant salary. It was an act of masterful misdirection. Every spilled glass, every misplaced chart, every flustered apology was a small piece of camouflage, hiding the woman who lay beneath. The woman who had spent 5 years planning this. The woman whose father he had destroyed. "Leave it." His voice was a low rasp, unused and rough, but it cut through her feigned panic like a razor. It was the first time he had spoken directly to her all day. She froze, her fingers hovering over a piece of the broken cup. Slowly, she looked up at him. His eyes were the color of dark, bitter coffee, the same shade as the stain now spreading across his priceless rug. There was no anger in them. There was no irritation. There was only a flat, unnerving assessment. He was watching her the way a scientist watches a specimen, with an unnerving degree of focus. He was looking for the cracks in her performance. She had to be perfect. She forced a wobbly smile. "It's no trouble, really. I made the mess." He did not smile back. He never smiled. "A maid will clean it. You have administered my morning medication." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. He tracked everything. "Yes, at 9 o'clock sharp," she chirped, standing up and wiping her hands on her uniform. Another small, unprofessional gesture designed to reinforce her image. "The physical therapy regimen is next on the schedule." His gaze dropped from her face to her hands. She willed them to remain steady. She had rehearsed this for years, but the reality of his presence was a physical weight, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe. He knew power and he knew deception. She was walking into the lion's den wearing the skin of a lamb, and she knew, with chilling certainty, that he could smell the blood beneath. His underboss, a thick-necked man named Russo, entered without knocking. He scowled at the mess on the floor, then at Lena. His dislike of her was palpable. He saw her as a frivolous, unprofessional risk in a house that could not afford any. "Marco, we have a problem down at the docks." Russo's voice was a low growl. He completely ignored her, as if she were a piece of furniture. Lena kept her expression placid and slightly vacant, her eyes wide. She was just the nurse. Unimportant. Invisible. It was her greatest weapon. Marco did not look at Russo. His eyes remained on Lena, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "The problem will wait," Marco said. His voice quiet but absolute. Russo's jaw tightened. He was not used to being put off. "But the Falcone crew—" "I said it will wait," Marco repeated, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Russo fell silent, his face a mask of simmering frustration. Only then did Marco's gaze finally leave Lena. He gestured with his chin toward the door. "Russo. Walk with me." It was the phrase he used when he wanted to move from one room to another. Russo stepped behind the expensive, customized wheelchair and began to push him toward the library. As they passed, Marco's eyes met Lena's one last time. She saw it then, a sliver of cold, hard suspicion. He did not believe her chaos was an accident. Not for a second. The game had just begun. Lena spent the next few days doubling down on her performance. She was a whirlwind of minor disasters. She mixed up his lunch order, bringing him the salmon he detested instead of the sea bass he preferred. She accidentally tripped the alarm for the west wing of the mansion, causing 2 guards to sprint into the hallway with their weapons drawn, only to find her standing there with a sheepish look and a feather duster. Each incident was carefully calibrated, annoying enough to be memorable, but not serious enough to get her fired. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts, designed to lull them into a state of constant low-grade irritation. They would become so used to her incompetence that they would stop seeing her at all. While they saw a clumsy girl, she was mapping the estate in her mind. She knew the guards' rotations, the blind spots in the security cameras, the location of every panic button and safe room. She knew Russo met with a bookkeeper every Tuesday, that Marco took calls from his lawyers on Thursdays, and that the entire house went into a quiet, tense lockdown on the first Sunday of every month, when the family's capos arrived to pay their respects and deliver their tribute. She learned his routine, the small rituals that structured his confined existence. He would spend hours in the library, a book open on his lap, though she rarely saw him turn a page. He was thinking, planning, ruling his empire from a leather armchair. Her job required a degree of physical intimacy that was unnerving. She helped him with the tedious mechanics of a body that no longer obeyed. Transferring from the chair to the bed, the daily physical therapy sessions designed to maintain muscle tone, the careful process of dressing him in his impeccably tailored suits. In those moments, she was all professional efficiency. Her touch was firm, impersonal, betraying none of the cold fury that simmered beneath her skin. She would feel the rigid muscles in his shoulders, the unyielding strength that remained in his upper body. She would see the faint, silvery scars that traced a path across his back, the permanent record of the attack that had put him in this chair, the attack that had also killed her father's oldest friend, and by extension, destroyed her family. Her father, an honest accountant named David, had been financially ruined when his partner, Matteo Moretti, was killed. Matteo was Marco's older brother. The story the world knew was that it was a tragic car accident. Lena knew better. It was an ambush by the Falcone family, a hit meant to decapitate the Moretti leadership. It had only half succeeded. It left Marco alive, but paralyzed, and it left her father with nothing. He had lost everything overnight and died of a heart attack 6 months later. Lena was left alone, with a name and a burning, patient need for retribution. Marco tested her constantly. He would ask her a question about a medication's side effects, his eyes sharp, waiting for her to stumble. She would recite the information from memory, then immediately do something clumsy, like knock over a pen holder, to shatter the impression of competence. He was a puzzle she had to solve, and she was a distraction he couldn't figure out. One afternoon, she was in his study, organizing his pill case for the week. It was a mundane task, but it gave her a reason to be near his desk. His laptop was open. He was looking over financial reports, his one good hand moving slowly across the trackpad. Russo was there, standing behind him, speaking in a low, urgent tone about territory disputes in the Bronx. "Falcone is getting bold," Russo muttered. "He's testing our reach. He thinks you're weak. Marco said nothing, his eyes on the screen. Lena pretended to be engrossed in her task, her head bowed. But she was listening to every word, her mind a cold, clear recording device. He needs to be reminded of his place, Russo pressed. Still, Marco was silent. Lena risked a glance. He was staring at a photograph on his desk, a silver-framed picture of him and another man, both younger, smiling, with their arms around each other. Matteo, Marco's brother, her father's friend, a ghost that haunted this house. Suddenly, Lena fumbled the pill case. Dozens of tiny pills, white, blue, and yellow, scattered across the polished surface of the desk, a few rolling onto the floor. "Oh, for goodness sake!" she exclaimed, her voice laced with theatrical frustration. Russo swore under his breath, his face contorted in disgust. "This woman is a menace. Get her out of here." He looked at Marco, expecting him to finally agree. But Marco's gaze was fixed on Lena. He watched her as she scrambled to pick up the pills, her movements a study in flustered inefficiency. He watched her, and a strange, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't annoyance. It was the dawning of a terrible understanding. "It's fine, Russo," Marco said softly. "Leave her. I want to watch." He wasn't watching a clumsy nurse. He was watching a performance. And for the first time, he seemed to be appreciating the artistry. He knew her chaos wasn't real. And the fact that he knew, and was letting it continue, was far more terrifying than any outburst of anger could have been. He was giving her more rope, waiting to see what she would do with it. The moment the mask slipped was not dramatic. It was quiet, and it changed everything. A week later, Marco was holding a meeting in his study. The heavy oak doors were closed. Through the thick wood, Lena could hear the low murmur of voices. 3 of his capos were inside. She knew from her observations that this was a war council. The Falcone problem was escalating. She was supposed to be in the kitchen, preparing his afternoon nutritional supplement. Instead, she was polishing a silver tray just outside the study door, her movements slow and methodical. She was not supposed to be there. A guard gave her a hard look, but she just offered him a sweet, vacant smile and continued her pointless task. Finally, the door opened and the 3 men filed out. Their faces were grim. They nodded curtly to the guard and disappeared down the hall. Lena waited a beat, then picked up the tray. It held a single glass of water she'd prepared. Taking a breath, she pushed the door open and entered the study. The air was thick with the smell of cigar smoke and tension. Marco was alone, his chair angled toward the window, his back to her. "I forgot your water, Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice in its usual airy register. He did not turn. "Put it down and go." His tone was dismissive. She walked to the large mahogany desk and set the tray down. As she did, her eyes swept the room. A map of the city was spread across the desk, marked with red and black pins. A satellite phone lay next to it. Financial ledgers were stacked to one side. It was the brain of his entire operation. She had to get closer to it. Her eyes landed on the ashtray. It was overflowing. A half-smoked cigar was still smoldering. An idea, sharp and dangerous, sparked in her mind. As she turned to leave, she let her sleeve brush against a stack of loose papers on the edge of the desk. They fluttered to the floor. "Oh, honestly," she sighed, bending to pick them up. It was the perfect excuse to get closer to the map, to the phone. She knelt, her back to him, and began gathering the sheets. Her eyes scanned the documents. Shipping manifests, names, routes. This was it. This was the information she needed. Her heart began a slow, heavy beat, not of fear, but of triumph. "You're very clumsy for a nurse." His voice was directly behind her. She hadn't heard him move. She froze, her hand on a manifest detailing a weapons shipment. Russo must have returned and pushed him closer while her back was turned. No, that wasn't right. The room was silent. She slowly turned her head. His wheelchair was right behind her, silent as a shark. He had moved it himself, using the powerful motor she rarely saw him engage. His face was inches from hers. The cold, assessing look was gone. In its place was something else. A raw, absolute certainty. "You have never been clumsy a day in your life," he stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. Her breath caught in her throat. The ditzy smile died on her lips. The mask, the carefully constructed facade she had worn for weeks, dissolved in an instant. She met his gaze, and for the first time she let him see. She let him see the cold intelligence, the sharp focus, the burning hatred she had kept so carefully hidden. Her chaos was a lie. He knew it, and she knew that he knew. The air between them crackled, a silent declaration of war, or something else entirely. She didn't have a name for it yet, but it terrified her more than his anger ever could. From that moment on, the dynamic shifted. The pretense was gone, at least between them. In front of Russo and the guards, she maintained a semblance of her former chaotic self, but the performance felt thin, brittle. When she was alone with Marco, a new tension settled in the room, thick and suffocating. He watched her with an intensity that stripped her bare. He didn't ask who she was or what she wanted. He just watched, his mind working behind those dark, still eyes. He started making her life difficult in new ways, not by testing her patience with feigned helplessness, but by testing her intellect. He would leave complex financial articles on the table and ask for her opinion. He would discuss geopolitical strategy and watch for her reaction. He was probing her, trying to map the boundaries of her knowledge. She would answer his questions with sharp, concise intelligence, then immediately retreat into the safety of her nursing duties, taking his blood pressure or reminding him about his medication. It was a duel fought in whispers and silent glances. One night, she was woken by a sound from his room, a low groan of pain. She found him in his bed, his body rigid, his face pale with sweat in the dim light of the moon. His jaw was clenched, his eyes squeezed shut. A spasm, a ghost of the injury that had taken his legs, was racking his body. It was a manifestation of the nerve damage, unpredictable and agonizing. "Mr. Moretti?" she whispered, approaching the bed. He didn't answer. His breathing was harsh and ragged. He was lost in the memory of the pain. "Matteo," he gasped, the name a shard of glass torn from his throat. "Matteo, I'm sorry." It was the first time she had heard his brother's name from his lips. It was a crack in his armor, a glimpse of the wound he carried deep inside. The official story was that Marco had been driving, that he had lost control of the car. The truth, the one Lena's father had pieced together before he died, was that Matteo had thrown himself in front of Marco, taking the bulk of the gunfire meant for his younger brother. Marco had failed to protect him. That failure was his deepest shame. Seeing his agony, a strange, unwelcome impulse moved through her. The cold fire of her revenge flickered. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? To see him suffer. But the man gasping in the bed was not just the monster from her nightmares. He was a man drowning in grief and pain. Her training took over. She moved to his side, her hands working with a cool efficiency that was entirely her own. She began to massage the rigid muscles of his neck and shoulders, her touch firm and knowing, working to disrupt the feedback loop of pain. She spoke in a low, calm voice, not offering empty platitudes, but talking him through it, grounding him in the present. "Breathe with me, Mr. Moretti. Focus on my voice. It's just a memory. It cannot harm you now." Slowly, the rigidity in his body began to ease. His breathing steadied. He opened his eyes and looked at her. They were dark with pain and something else. Vulnerability. It was a shocking, disarming sight. He, who was always in control, looked at her with the bareness of a man who had been stripped of all his defenses. Her hand was still on his shoulder. The warmth of his skin seeped through the thin fabric of his shirt. It was the first time she had touched him without a clinical purpose. The moment stretched, silent and charged. The nurse and the patient were gone. The avenger and the target were gone. There were only two people in a dark room, bound by a shared history of loss. She should have pulled her hand away. She should have retreated back into her role. But she didn't. She left it there, a small, steady point of contact in the darkness. He didn't pull away either. He simply held her gaze, and in the space between them, the ground began to shift. She was here to destroy him, but in that moment, she had offered him comfort. And that small act of treason against her own mission terrified her more than anything. The next morning, a package arrived. It was delivered by a courier who vanished before security could question him. Russo brought it into the study, his face grim. He placed the plain cardboard box on Marco's desk. Inside was a single, dead falcon, its neck broken. A clear, brutal message from the Falcone family. They were done testing the waters. They were coming for him. The house went into an immediate lockdown. Guards moved with a quiet, deadly purpose. Lena could feel the tension like a physical force, pressing in on her. Russo cornered her in the hallway. "This is your fault," he snarled, his voice low and venomous. "Things were quiet until you showed up. You're a disruption, a bad omen. I want you gone." Today he was right in a way. Her presence, her subtle manipulations, had likely accelerated the timeline. She had a perfect opportunity to leave. She could walk out the door, her mission incomplete but her life intact. The danger was no longer a distant threat. It was here, inside these walls. She could disappear and let the two families tear each other apart. But then she thought of the name Marco had gasped in the night. Matteo. She thought of her father's ruined face, the light gone from his eyes. Her plan had been simple. Gather enough evidence of Marco's operation to hand over to the Falcones, letting them finish the job they'd started years ago. Let one monster devour another. But seeing Marco's pain, hearing his guilt, had complicated the clean lines of her revenge. Therefore, she made a choice. She walked past a furious Russo and entered the study. Marco was staring at the dead bird, his face a mask of cold fury. "Russo thinks I should leave," she said, her voice steady. He didn't look at her. "It would be the safest option. I'm not afraid of them," she said. It was the truth. He finally turned his head, his eyes boring into hers. Why? She could have lied. She could have invented a reason. Instead, she gave him a sliver of the truth. Because they are sloppy and arrogant. And sloppy, arrogant men always lose. A long silence stretched between them. He was weighing her words, weighing her. She had just declared her allegiance, not out of loyalty, but out of a cold, strategic assessment. She was choosing his side in this war. "Stay out of the West Wing," he said finally. "And do not leave the house without my permission." It was not a request. It was an order. But it was also an acceptance. She had chosen to stay in the line of fire, and he was letting her. Lena knew she couldn't just be a spectator. Staying meant acting. She had spent years honing her skills not just in nursing, but in digital warfare. Her father, in his grief, had become obsessed with tracking the digital footprints of the men who had ruined him, and he had taught her everything he knew. Now she put that knowledge to use. Under the guise of troubleshooting the estate's slow Wi-Fi, she gained access to the house's network. From there, it was a simple matter to breach the insecure outer layers of the Falcone organization's communications. They were arrogant, just as she'd told Marco. They used barely encrypted channels. Within hours, she found what she was looking for: details of an ambush. The Falcones were planning to hit a major Moretti shipment moving through a warehouse district in Red Hook. It was their biggest move yet, designed to cripple Marco's finances. Lena held the information in her hands. She could let it happen. It would weaken Marco, bringing her one step closer to her ultimate goal. Or she could intervene. The thought of the dead falcon, of the undisguised hatred in Russo's eyes, of Marco's pained whisper in the dark, coalesced into a decision. She would not let the Falcones win. But she would not give the victory to Marco either. She would create a third option. She constructed a new identity, a ghost in the machine, and sent an anonymous, untraceable tip. Not to Marco's men. She sent it to a notoriously violent Albanian crew that had no love for either the Morettis or the Falcones. The tip was simple. A rival crew was moving a fortune in product through Red Hook at a specific time, and their security would be focused on the wrong direction. She set the trap, and then she waited. The result was carnage. The Albanians hit the Falcone ambush crew with overwhelming force. It was a bloody, three-way firefight that left the Falcones decimated and the Moretti shipment untouched, its drivers having been diverted by a last-minute, anonymous traffic alert she had also engineered. It was a masterful, morally gray act of puppetry. She had protected Marco's interests without him ever knowing, while simultaneously crippling his enemy. The next day, Russo delivered the news to Marco in the study. Lena was there, taking Marco's blood pressure, her face a mask of placid innocence. "It's a massacre," Russo said, his voice holding a note of awe. The Falcones walked into a buzzsaw. The Albanians tore them to pieces. "We didn't lose a man. We didn't even fire a shot." Marco was silent for a long time, his fingers steepled under his chin. He looked at the financial reports, at the map, and then his eyes lifted and met Lena's over the top of the blood pressure cuff. His gaze was sharp, speculative, and deeply suspicious. He didn't know how she had done it, but he knew with absolute certainty that it had been her. And the look in his eyes told her that he was both terrified and impressed.